one of the most influential figures of the 20th century, a symbol of revolutionary struggles around the world and the subject of the most famous photo in the world. All of this refers to one person, Ernesto Rafael Guevara de la Serna, known as Che Guevara. Ernesto was born in 1928 in Argentina into an aristocratic family. This family had 5 children, and Ernesto was the first. Ernesto's youth was spent in comfort and happiness, until, at the age of 23, Ernesto decided to drop out of his final year of medical school and traveled through South America on a motorcycle. During this trip, his friend Alberto Granado accompanied him. When they reached the first city, Ernesto missed his fiancée Chichina very much and wrote her a letter saying, "I loved you. I don't know why I ran away." In the next city, they went to the home of one of Alberto's friends, who was a doctor. This friend said to Ernesto, "If you stayed another year, you would have finished medical school. Wouldn't it have been better to finish your studies?" Ernesto replied, "I just looked at him, and in my heart I thought, then I would have to live a miserable, repetitive life like you, repeating the same thing every day." Ernesto said, "Okay, you stay and study. I'll go and learn." They continued their journey, and many times they fell in the sandy hills. Once, Ernesto's foot got caught under the exhaust, and the burn mark stayed with him for the rest of his life. Another time, he got a severe fever and chills and barely managed to reach the first city. They stayed there for 2 days and then continued their trip. After some time, they finally left Argentina and reached Chile. There, they found out that the newspapers had focused on their journey, and because Ernesto and his friend were volunteering to help people in the leper colonies, the newspapers had headlines like, "Two specialists in leprosy traveled to the cities of lepers." Ernesto writes in his book that in Chile they were treated very well. In almost every border city, people knew them and had seen their photo in the newspapers. They continued their journey toward the leper colonies in Peru. To continue their journey, they had to secretly board a ship. When the ship's officers came, they hid in the ship's restroom. However, the officers found them, and as punishment, Ernesto was made responsible for cleaning the restroom, while Alberto worked in the kitchen. During their journey on the ship, they got to know some miners. The injustice faced by the workers deeply affected Ernesto and Alberto. Chile provided 20% of the world's copper, and many workers there were working under difficult conditions. The suffering of the workers left a strong impact on Ernesto's mind, and gradually his ideological views began to take shape. They continued their journey, walking for miles, secretly boarding ships and trucks until they reached the border of Peru. In Peru, they had to walk through the desert from morning until night. The hunger and the cold nights were so unbearable that they couldn't sleep and had to continue walking until morning. Afterward, they managed to catch a ride in a truck. They traveled with some Native Americans in the back of the truck. Their journey continued, and they reached Peru. What caught Ernesto's attention in Peru was the Spanish colonization and the oppression faced by the Native Americans. There, he saw large agricultural fields being worked on by laborers who were paid very little. Tyranny was rampant in all the cities. Their final destination in Peru was a leper colony. There, they saw nurses working selflessly with minimal resources for the lepers. The extremely limited resources in hospitals and the miserable conditions of the peasants, along with the suffering of the people, troubled Ernesto's soul. They stayed in the colony for a few days, helping as much as they could, and then continued their journey. Ernesto's health was not good at all. Due to his asthma, he was hospitalized for a few days. When his condition improved, he continued the journey in the back of a truck with the sheep, eventually reaching Lima, the capital of Peru, where they helped care for the lepers for a few more days. 6 months had passed since their journey began, but they continued on, helping lepers wherever they went. Ernesto celebrated his 24th birthday while traveling. Part of the journey was done in a boat they had built themselves until they reached Colombia and then Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. In Caracas, Alberto stayed behind, but Ernesto flew to Miami, America, aboard a plane that was carrying racehorses. The plane was scheduled to stop in Miami for 1 day before returning to Caracas and then heading back to Argentina, marking the end of the journey. However, the pilot decided to stay in Miami and repair the plane's engines, which took a month. During this month, Ernesto was able to see America up close. After the repairs were completed, he returned to Argentina by plane, and the fascinating journey that had lasted 8 months came to an end. Now, let's focus on Ernesto's political life and explore how he met Fidel Castro and how the two became the leaders of the Cuban Revolution. Before the revolution, Cuba and Guatemala were under the control of different regimes. In Cuba, the government was led by the famous General Batista, who had overthrown the previous president in 1934 and installed one of his own men as president. However, after 6 years, General Batista wasn't satisfied and became president himself for 2 terms. After his second term, he could no longer run for president due to the constitution, so another person took over. But in 1952, 4 years later, Batista decided to run again for the presidency. During the election campaign, he realized that other candidates were ahead of him, so he decided to stage a coup, overthrow the current president, and stay in power for another 7 years as an absolute dictator, doing whatever he wished to the people. Now, moving to Guatemala, Colonel Arbenz, nicknamed Big Blonde, was the president, and he was implementing some land reforms. During his trip to Guatemala, Che Guevara met a woman named Hilda, an economist and writer. Hilda introduced Che to several high-ranking officials in Arbenz's government, including exiled Cuban revolutionaries, such as Castro and his brothers. At that time, the United States staged a military coup in Guatemala, and Big Blonde, or Colonel Arbenz, sought refuge in the Mexican embassy. Che Guevara, who had already started his political activities, fled to the Argentine embassy, and Hilda was arrested. This overthrow of Arbenz's regime by the CIA created a belief in Che that the United States would destroy any country seeking progress and freedom, seeing the U.S. as an imperialist power. This event strengthened Che's belief that an armed rebellion supported by the people was the only way to change the conditions in countries like Guatemala. After the events in Guatemala and Hilda's release, Che and Hilda went to Mexico, where they got married, though they separated 3 years later. In Mexico, Che Guevara witnessed the poverty of the people, and through his previous experiences and his growing acquaintance with Fidel Castro, his anti-imperialist motivations intensified. He then joined the July 26 movement. What is the July 26 movement? It refers to the event on July 26th, 3 years prior, in 1953, when Fidel Castro and several other revolutionaries attempted an unsuccessful attack on a military barracks in Cuba. 3 years later, this revolutionary group, led by Fidel Castro and consisting of 81 exiled Cuban revolutionaries, including his brother and Che Guevara, gathered in Mexico. Under the name July 26 Movement, they set out for Cuba in a leaky boat to fight against General Batista's regime. The plan was to conduct guerrilla attacks from the very beginning. At first, Che Guevara joined the group as a doctor. However, during their first attack, he had to pick up the rifle of one of the fallen soldiers and fight. It was there that he transformed from a doctor into a revolutionary guerrilla fighter. Soon he became the best fighter of the group and was appointed as the leader of the group. In the first significant battle, Che Guevara, along with Fidel Castro, captured a major military garrison. Immediately after this victory, General Batista in Cuba increased security measures at all the military posts. As the guerrilla attacks continued, Che Guevara was forced to separate from Castro and take the wounded to a safe place, temporarily distancing himself from direct combat. He believed that a true revolutionary always adapts to the situation. Che Guevara, even though he wasn't directly involved in battles, later said that during the events in which the wounded were involved, he became a true revolutionary fighter, and there was no turning back for him. In the course of the wars, Che Guevara would visit every village they came across, and as much as possible, he would treat people who had probably never seen a doctor in their lives. Along with his comrades, Guevara set up schools, clinics, shelters, and other resources during the guerrilla warfare. Since all of these were mobile, they took them wherever they went. Later, Fidel Castro appointed Guevara as the commander of the second column and made him responsible for the training of new forces. Guevara was a strict and fierce leader. If someone fled from the group, he would send someone after them to arrest and kill them so that no one would have the thought of escaping. He taught his soldiers to fight until the end and was strongly opposed to negotiating with the enemy. When Fidel Castro signed an agreement of cooperation with the anti-Batista groups, Guevara even objected to him, saying, "We must fight, not negotiate. These groups are seeking negotiations instead of fighting and will never get anywhere." Later, when these negotiations failed, Fidel became the leader of all the anti-Batista groups, and Guevara became the most famous leader of Fidel Castro's guerrilla fighters. In imitation of the CIA's action in Guatemala, where they set up a radio center for a coup, Guevara also set up a radio station called Rebel Radio. This radio station was used to announce declarations and make changes. Another important action Guevara took was in an operation where he led a group of 1,500 Batista soldiers who were trying to get Fidel to exile in Qatar and defeated them. American generals who analyzed this operation admitted that it was flawlessly executed. Guevara even wrote a book on guerrilla warfare. He was wounded several times during the fights, and in the end, Fidel urged him, "You are the commander. You need to lead, not be on the front lines of the battle." Guevara and his comrades continued their fight, capturing village after village, and eventually, on the night of December 31st, 1959, Rebel Radio announced that Guevara's column had successfully captured Santa Clara. While Havana was the capital of Cuba, Santa Clara was the key point connecting the central region of the country to the south. Capturing this city meant the practical defeat of Batista. The next day, General Batista fled from Cuba, and Fidel Castro, Guevara, and their comrades emerged victorious and established the new Cuban government. After the revolution, Guevara took on various government positions, such as the head of the central bank, ambassador, and minister of industry. He also played a key role in Cuba's foreign policy. However, it became clear that he was not suited for governance. He was not successful in most of the administrative roles he held. One position he had was overseeing the review court for the La Habana prison. Evidence suggests that Guevara ordered the execution of hundreds of prisoners, and none were acquitted. He even wrote in his diary about how he personally executed several people. In his speeches, he defended these executions and considered them necessary for the revolution. Guevara also set up forced labor camps for homosexuals and anti-revolutionaries. His opponents argued that he had no plans for the post-revolution period. For many, Cuba's future seemed bound to a life of hardship under the yoke of a dictator, much like the regime of Batista, which had been replaced by Fidel Castro's own dictatorship. Guevara knew that he was not a man of government, but a man of war. He gave a famous speech at the United Nations, where he harshly criticized the United States and imperialism. After serving in Cuba for 6 years, he left all his government positions and left the country to continue his fight against imperialism in other nations of Latin America. Guevara had always said that a true revolutionary must go where they are needed. He felt that Cuba no longer needed him. Guevara then turned his attention to the Congo in West Africa. But by then, it was too late. He wanted to export the Cuban Revolution to Africa and recruited local fighters to join his struggle. However, he failed in the Congo. One reason for his failure was that despite trying to keep his presence secret, the CIA had information about his location and activities, which they shared with the Congolese authorities. After his failure in the Congo, Guevara decided to head to Bolivia. He traveled there under the guise of an Uruguayan businessman working for the United States, using the alias Ramon. 3 days after arriving in Bolivia, Guevara was already organizing his guerrilla army. 3 months after his arrival, the United States sent a team to train the Bolivian army. Guevara continued his work in Bolivia for 341 days, training guerrilla groups and attacking military bases. Eventually, near the village of La Higuera, Guevara and his comrades were surrounded by the Bolivian army, which was assisted by CIA agents. In the end, Guevara was executed by firing squad on October 9, 1967, at the age of 39. As he had said, a revolutionary must either win or die in battle. Guevara won in Cuba, but died in Bolivia. His final words before his death were reportedly, "Shoot, you are only going to kill a man." And indeed, they did. Guevara became a symbol of inspiration for revolutionaries worldwide. After his execution, the Bolivian government secretly buried his body. 30 years later, in 1997, one of the officers involved in the burial revealed the location of Guevara's grave. Using the officer's clues, Guevara's remains were exhumed and brought back to Cuba, where he was given a public funeral. Hundreds of thousands of Cubans participated in the ceremony and paid their respects to him. Guevara lived and fought for his cause as his friends remembered him, and as he had always wanted, he died fighting for his ideals.